Helping others is often one of life's greatest joys. Many people over 60 have spent decades caring for family, supporting friends, and stepping in when someone needed a hand. It's part of how you build a life with meaning. But sometimes what starts as kindness slowly turns into obligation. You're no longer asked, you're expected. And when you say no, you're met not with understanding, but disappointment, blame, or silence. This shift can be hard to name at first. It's subtle. You help a neighbor with their shopping while they recover from surgery. A few weeks pass, they seem better, but the list still shows up in your mailbox. There's no conversation, just the quiet assumption that you'll keep going. One part of you wants to say something. The other part wonders, wouldn't that make me seem rude? Or worse, selfish? For many, the difficulty lies in old patterns. From early on, you were likely taught to be dependable, to avoid causing trouble, to be generous, and to keep the peace. These values served you well in many ways, but they can also make it incredibly hard to draw a line, especially with people you care about. You fear what might follow, a disappointed look, a cold tone, the feeling that you've let someone down. It's as if your worth is tied to how much you give and how often you say yes. Elaine, a retired nurse, found herself in that place. For over 10 years, she cooked Sunday lunch for her large family. It was something she enjoyed until it started feeling like a duty. After a minor surgery, she expected someone might offer to take over. No one did. When she finally mentioned needing a break, her daughter responded, "But we count on you." That's what you do. Elaine didn't know whether to feel angry or ashamed. This is where the quiet resentment begins. You may still do the thing, cook the meal, give the ride, watch the grandchildren, but something changes inside. You're no longer giving from a place of joy. You're giving because you feel you have no choice. And over time, that emotional strain begins to show up in other areas: fatigue, irritability, even sadness. You start to ask yourself, why does this feel so heavy now? It's important to realize that refusing a request does not cancel out your love. It doesn't erase years or decades of being there for others. You're not suddenly uncaring because you say, "Not this time." You're just being human. You have needs, too. You have limits. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. Frank, a grandfather in his 70s, often babysat his great-grandchildren. He loved them dearly, but the long hours were becoming harder to manage. When he told his granddaughter he could no longer commit every weekend, she replied, "I guess we'll have to find someone else then." Her tone stung. But Frank's wife reminded him, "You've helped for years." Saying no today doesn't undo all of that. It can be helpful to practice short, clear responses that respect both your needs and the relationship. For example, "I care about you, but I'm not able to help right now." Or, "That doesn't work for me, but I hope you find another way." These words are simple but powerful. They let others know where you stand, without apology or drama. Another important shift is how you view your time. Just because you're retired doesn't mean you're available around the clock. Time is a precious resource at every stage of life. And now, perhaps more than ever, you deserve to use it in ways that nourish you, not just serve others. Darlene, recently retired, had plans to take a local art class and join a walking group. But each time she tried to sign up, something came up. A neighbor needed a ride, her cousin needed company at a doctor's visit, someone's dog needed watching. She realized her week filled up with things other people wanted, not what she had hoped for. When she began politely declining some of the requests, she was surprised. The people in her life managed. They adjusted. They had simply assumed she was always free, because she never said otherwise. Sometimes the people around us don't see our exhaustion, not out of malice, but because we've never shown it. We've smiled, said of course, and hidden the cost. But just as we've taught others how to treat us, we can also teach them how to respect our limits. Setting boundaries doesn't mean closing your heart. It means creating enough space to keep your heart open without running dry. It's about balance, the ability to say yes when it's right and no when it's necessary. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That includes recognizing what gives you life and what drains it. It means stepping into your later years, not just as someone who serves, but as someone who lives fully on their own terms. You've spent a lifetime helping others. Now is the time to include yourself in that circle of care. Not out of rebellion, but out of wisdom. There's a quiet moment that many women over 60 have experienced, but rarely talk about. It's the moment when you realize that people don't really ask you anymore. They assume. They assume you'll take care of the details, organize the event, show up early, stay late, remember the birthdays, and smooth over the conflicts. You've become the dependable one. The rock. The one who always says yes. At first, it feels like a compliment. Being needed gives us a sense of purpose. For many women, especially those who've spent decades raising children, caring for parents, or managing a household, helping is woven into identity. But when everyone expects and no one asks, when your willingness becomes invisible, the joy fades and something heavier takes its place. It often begins with small signs. A phone call with no greeting, just, "Can you do me a quick favor?" A family gathering where you're the only one cooking, while others chat in the next room. The feeling that if you stopped showing up, things would fall apart and no one would even notice you were tired. Marina, 68, started noticing this with her younger sister. She had always been the one to manage their mother's appointments, pick up prescriptions, and handle the paperwork. Her sister would send texts like, "Let me know what the doctor says," without ever offering to attend. One day, after a long day at the hospital, Marina sat in her car and cried. Not because of the work, she could manage the logistics, but because no one thought to ask how she was coping. Emotional labor, the invisible kind, is often where women feel the heaviest toll. You're not just doing the tasks, you're managing the emotions around them. You're the one making sure everyone gets along, that no one feels left out, that birthdays are remembered and holidays are special. It's a beautiful skill, but it's also exhausting when it goes unacknowledged. And here's the hard truth. The more competent you are, the more invisible your efforts can become. People assume that because you do it well, it must be easy for you. They forget there's a cost. They don't see the nights you lie awake thinking about everyone else's needs, and the mornings you wake up already behind on your own. Saying no in these situations feels like more than just turning down a task. It feels like stepping out of your role. And when that role has been part of your identity for decades, it's frightening. Who are you if not the helper? The peacemaker? The one who holds it all together? But here's something many women discover, often later than they wish. Being everything to everyone leaves very little space for yourself. You start to forget what brings you joy when no one is watching. You might even forget what it feels like to be cared for, instead of always doing the caring. Lucinda, 70, had spent her life taking care of others. First as a mother, then as the go-to aunt, then as the neighbor everyone counted on. One day, after a dizzy spell, she mentioned it to her daughter, hoping for concern. Instead, her daughter replied, "Are you still okay to pick up the kids later?" That moment stayed with Lucinda. It wasn't that her daughter didn't love her, it was that she had come to expect Lucinda's help like one expects the sun to rise. Constant, dependable, unquestioned. This is where change begins, not with confrontation, but with clarity. You don't need to make a grand announcement or write a dramatic letter. Often, it starts with a simple question you ask yourself: do I really want to do this? If the answer is no, you're allowed to honor that. The first time you say no, it might feel uncomfortable. You might imagine others thinking poorly of you, but more often than not, they adapt. And even if they push back, you are not responsible for their disappointment. You are responsible for your well-being. Try small phrases like, "That won't work for me today. I'm focusing on some things for myself this week. I'd love to help, but I need to rest right now." You don't need to apologize. You don't need to over-explain. A boundary doesn't require permission. And what comes next is just as important. Once you start protecting your time and energy, you get to ask, what do I want to do with it? This question can feel strange at first. For years, your wants may have come second, or not at all. But they're still there. Maybe you want to take a quiet walk in the morning without rushing back. Maybe you want to read, or start writing, or try yoga, or simply sit in silence without a to-do list. These aren't luxuries, they're acts of reclamation. When you live with this kind of presence, something changes. You begin to feel more grounded. You become less reactive, more thoughtful. And ironically, you become better at helping others because your help comes from fullness, not fatigue. Carl Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." But he also believed that the journey of life, especially in its second half, is about becoming whole, not just useful. Wholeness includes rest. It includes pleasure. It includes making choices based on desire, not just duty. It means trusting that you are enough, even when you are not available. Being kind is not the same as being used. Being loving is not the same as being exhausted. You can be generous without being drained. And if someone calls you selfish for finally choosing yourself, let them. Their discomfort is not your burden. Your life is not a service menu. It's a sacred space that you've earned the right to live fully, with joy and freedom. There's a deep truth most mothers carry. The love you feel for your children never fades, no matter how old they get. Whether they're 15 or 45, a part of you still watches over them, still wants to make things easier, safer, better. You see their struggles, their exhaustion, their worries, and your instinct is to step in, just like you always have. But what happens when that instinct is no longer just a gesture of love, but an unspoken expectation? When the roles don't evolve, and you find yourself doing for your adult children what they should be doing for themselves, or what's no longer yours to carry. For many women in their 60s and beyond, this is a quiet tension that builds slowly over time. It might begin with helping out after the birth of a grandchild, cooking meals, doing laundry, offering rides. Then months or even years pass, and nothing changes. You're still picking up the pieces, running errands, babysitting every weekend, sometimes without being asked, sometimes without even being thanked. There's a part of you that doesn't mind. You love your family. But there's also a part that feels tired, unseen, maybe even taken for granted. And when you finally say no, even gently, it's met with confusion, guilt trips, or worse, silence. This happened to Teresa, 66, who had been helping her son and daughter-in-law with their 2 young children for over 3 years. What started as a temporary arrangement turned into a daily routine. She canceled trips, postponed doctor appointments, and rarely had time to rest. One day, when she told her son she needed a week off to care for her own health, he said, "But we need you. What are we supposed to do?" Teresa didn't answer right away. She was still trying to understand how love had turned into a job she never applied for. Part of what makes this dynamic difficult is that for many mothers, caregiving is part of identity. You were the one who held everything together, through sickness, heartbreak, and chaos. And letting go feels like abandoning your role, your purpose. But what's often overlooked is that continuing to overfunction for your adult children can stunt their own growth and slowly erode your well-being. There's also the fear of being misunderstood. Mothers are often judged more harshly when they step back. A father who says, "I need some space," is seen as setting boundaries. A mother who says the same is labeled cold or even cruel. This double standard is deeply rooted, and it makes it even harder to speak your truth. But here's something to consider. If your help is given out of guilt or fear, instead of genuine desire, it's not sustainable. Over time, it leads to resentment, not just toward your children, but toward yourself. You begin to wonder, why did I let this happen? Why can't I say something? And yet you can. Not with anger, not with blame, but with honesty and clarity. Start by recognizing the emotional patterns at play. Are you helping because you truly want to? Or because you feel obligated? Do you fear what your children will think of you if you stop? Do you carry unspoken guilt, maybe from your past, or from things you wish had gone differently? These are heavy questions, but they are also liberating, because once you see the pattern, you can choose something different. You can begin small. Instead of automatically saying yes, pause. Say, "Let me think about that and get back to you." Give yourself the gift of time. You are not on call. You are not an endless resource. If you do want to help, define the terms clearly. I can watch the kids on Tuesdays, but not the whole week. I'll bring lunch this time, but I won't be able to cook every Sunday. These limits aren't selfish. They're healthy. And they teach your children and your grandchildren that care goes both ways. Some mothers fear that setting boundaries will damage the relationship. But in truth, relationships built on silent sacrifice are already fragile. Real connection requires honesty. And sometimes the most loving thing you can say is, "I trust you to handle this without me." Rosanna, 72, shared her story in a community circle. Her daughter had been relying on her constantly for childcare, emotional support, even managing bills. Rosanna felt drained, but saying no felt unthinkable. One afternoon, during a moment of deep fatigue, she softly told her daughter, "I'm not well. I can't keep doing everything." There was a long pause. Then her daughter, with tears in her eyes, said, "I didn't realize. I thought you were okay because you never said anything." That conversation changed everything. It didn't erase all the habits overnight, but it opened a door. A door toward more balance, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. Carl Jung spoke often about the process of individuation, becoming fully oneself, separate from the roles society places upon us. For mothers, this is especially important in later life. Your role is not frozen in time. You are not just a mother. You are a woman with her own needs, desires, rhythms, and wisdom. Jung once wrote, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. When you begin to live more fully, not just in service but in truth, you give your children permission to grow too. So if you feel the weight of silent expectations, know this: you are allowed to change. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say, "I've done enough for now." And those who truly love you will understand, maybe not at first, but eventually. And if they don't, that's their journey to walk. Yours now is the path back to yourself. Guilt is a quiet shadow. It often appears just when you start doing something for yourself. You say no to a request, and suddenly there it is, that inner voice asking, "Was that selfish? Did I disappoint them? Am I failing as a mother?" For many women, especially those over 60, guilt has been a constant companion. It shaped how you mothered, how you loved, how you gave. It kept you up at night worrying about whether you'd done enough or too much. And now, when you finally begin to protect your time, your energy, your health, guilt returns, whispering that you're breaking some invisible rule. But here's the truth: guilt is not always a sign that you've done something wrong. Often, it's a sign that you're doing something new, something necessary. It means you're crossing a boundary that's been in place for too long, not because it's right, but because it became familiar. Many women have lived decades as caretakers. You were the center of the family's rhythm. You anticipated needs before they were spoken. You filled in gaps without being asked. You carried the emotional tone of the household, quietly and skillfully. And you did it all without expecting much in return. That pattern runs deep. And when you begin to step away from it, even just a little, your nervous system reacts. Your body says, "Wait, this feels dangerous." But it's not danger. It's discomfort. There's a difference. Elisa, 71, described the feeling this way: "When I told my son I wouldn't be driving across town every weekend anymore, I hung up the phone and cried. Not because he was upset, he wasn't, but because I felt like I had failed him, like I was taking something away. It took me a while to realize I was grieving a version of myself I no longer wanted to be." Grief and guilt often travel together. You're not just saying no to a task, you're saying goodbye to an old role. And with that, you might face resistance. Not just from others, but from within. You wonder, if I'm not always available, will they still need me? If I stop giving so much, what's left of me? But this is where the real work begins, understanding that love does not require exhaustion. That presence is more powerful when it's rooted in choice, not obligation. That your value is not measured by how often you say yes. When guilt arises, try not to push it away. Instead, pause. Ask it, what are you trying to protect? Often, guilt is protecting an old belief that a good mother sacrifices, that rest is laziness, that saying no is rejection. These beliefs may have served a purpose in the past, but they no longer serve you now. You can honor your past without being bound by it. You can love your children and still say, "I need today for myself." You can be generous and still rest. You can show up without burning out. A helpful tool is to separate guilt from responsibility. Just because you feel guilty doesn't mean you've done something wrong. Feelings are not facts. You are allowed to examine them and then decide what's true. For example, let's say your daughter calls and asks you to watch the kids, again, on short notice. You're exhausted. You say, "I'm sorry, I can't today." Guilt kicks in. She's struggling. She needs me. What kind of mother says no? Stop. Breathe. Ask, did I do something harmful? Or did I simply honor my own limit? More often than not, you'll find you didn't cause harm. You just broke a habit. And breaking habits, especially emotional ones, always feels uncomfortable at first. Another way to soften guilt is to return to your intention. You're not pulling away to punish or abandon. You're making space for your health, your peace, your joy. And from that place, you can still give, but in a way that doesn't cost you everything. Rosa, 68, used to say yes to everything her adult children asked. One day, after a long week filled with errands, appointments, and babysitting, she sat down and realized she hadn't had a single quiet hour for herself. She felt resentful, and then guilty for feeling resentful. But instead of pushing the guilt away, she wrote about it. She asked herself, what would I say to a friend who felt this way? The answer was clear. You deserve rest. You've done enough. This shift from self-criticism to self-compassion is what turns guilt into wisdom. It doesn't mean you never feel guilty again. It means you learn to listen to it without obeying it blindly. Carl Jung understood this inner conflict. He wrote, "Shame is a soul-eating emotion. Guilt, when left unchecked, turns into shame, a deep sense that there's something wrong with you for having needs at all. But there isn't. In fact, having needs is what makes you human and what allows you to grow, even in later life. Jung also spoke of the importance of the second half of life, a time not for sacrifice, but for integration. A time to bring your wisdom inward, to become whole, to rediscover yourself beyond your roles. You are not just a mother. You are a person with your own rhythm, dreams, desires. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to evolve. So the next time guilt knocks on your door, pause. Breathe. Thank it for its concern. And then remind yourself, you can be a loving mother without being a permanent caregiver. You can support your family without sacrificing your peace. You can step back and still be close. Let that be the new truth you live by. After all the reflection, all the boundaries, and all the no's that needed to be said, something surprising can happen. You begin to rediscover the joy of helping. But this time, it feels different. It's not heavy, it's not expected, it's not tangled up in guilt or fear. It's a yes that comes from clarity, not habit. A yes that includes you. Because saying yes is not the enemy. The problem was never the help itself. The problem was helping beyond your limits, in silence, without rest, or without being seen. Once those patterns shift, something opens up. You start to ask yourself, how do I want to show up now? What kind of support feels good to give? Where does my yes feel honest, and where does it cost too much? There's a kind of beauty in choosing your yes. It's a return to agency. You help not because you're afraid of disappointing someone, but because you want to. Not because it's your job, but because it's your gift. Marina, 70, had spent years being her family's silent support system. After working through resentment and setting clearer boundaries, she found a new rhythm. She started offering help on her terms. I can watch the kids one afternoon a week, and I'll bring a meal once a month. That's what I can give with joy. Her family adjusted, and she found herself showing up with more presence and warmth, not because she had to, but because she could. This kind of help is no longer draining. It's rooted in choice. And when help is chosen, it becomes an act of connection, not of sacrifice. That's the shift from obligation to generosity. Generosity doesn't mean overextending. It means giving from a place that still leaves something for you. It means staying full enough to pour into others without running dry. But even generosity needs structure. Boundaries don't disappear once things feel lighter. They become a foundation of what makes your yes sustainable. Here's a helpful way to think about it. A heavy yes is one that comes with resentment, pressure, or fatigue. A hollow yes is one you give without really meaning it, just to keep the peace. A wholehearted yes is one that honors both the other person and yourself. You'll start to feel the difference. A wholehearted yes doesn't create tension in your body. It's not followed by regret or dread. It's followed by peace, even joy. That doesn't mean every task becomes fun. But even when it's tiring, you know you chose it. That makes all the difference. This is especially important in the relationships that matter most, with your children, your grandchildren, your close friends. When your help is given from a full heart, those around you feel the difference too. It becomes less about what you do and more about how you are. Present, calm, attentive, loving. And here's the beautiful irony. The more you honor your needs, the more deeply you're able to love. Not in a rushed, overworked way, but in a steady, rooted way. You become someone who models care that includes the self, not just the other. This is a kind of emotional maturity that Jung often pointed toward. He believed that true healing happens when we integrate the parts of ourselves that were left behind, especially the ones that were silenced in favor of duty. He once wrote, "To ask the right question is already half the solution." And the right question here is, how can I be helpful without losing myself? It's not always simple. There will still be moments of doubt. Moments when someone reacts poorly to your limits. Moments when you fall back into old patterns. That's normal. What matters is that you keep coming back to yourself. You keep choosing with awareness. You're not expected to be perfect. You're allowed to stumble. But now you have tools, reflection boundaries, and the ability to choose your yes with intention. And maybe that's the final message of this journey, that real freedom isn't about never helping again. It's about helping from a place of wholeness. It's about saying yes not because you're needed, but because you're willing. Your value was never tied to how much you could endure. It was always in your presence, your wisdom, your quiet strength. Let this chapter of your life be one where your help is no longer hidden or automatic, but offered with clarity, with limits, and with love. That's not selfish. That's sacred.